In today's lesson, we're going to continue thinking about our key question, which is to what extent has economic globalisation created an opportunity for countries to develop? And we're going to look at that and break it down into three questions. How can we measure development? How have some LICs become NEEs? And is economic globalisation an opportunity for development? So thinking about how we measure development, we generally term countries LICs, NEEs and HICs. LIC stands for low income country, and they are countries with a low level of development. NEE stands for newly emerging economy, and that tends to be countries that have moved from being an LIC but aren't quite a HIC yet. HIC stands for high income country, and that countries have a high level of development in their HICs. And countries move from being LICs through to NEEs and HICs at different speeds and at different times. So in the 1800s, we saw Europe moving from being a newly emerging economy, moving from being an LIC to an emerging economy. Then we see in the 1980s the Asian tigers emerging as NEEs. They're shown on the map on the left. South Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan and Singapore. And they developed much, much faster than Europe had. And then in the 1990s we start to see the emergence of BRICS as NEEs. That's Brazil, India, China and Russia. And again, they also developed much quicker than Europe did. Then in the 2000s, we see Mexico, India, Nigeria and Turkey emerging as NEEs. And yet again, they developed a lot quicker than Europe, even though they started developing a lot later. Right, so we're thinking about how we measure a country's level of development. In your books, pause the video and write down as many ways that you can think of measuring a country's level of development. We're looking to get 8. Off you go. Check what you got against the answers on the board. Pause the video as you do that. So we've got GNI per capita. That measures the size of a country's economy. Total value of goods and services produced by a country in a year, and we divide it by the population. Otherwise, countries that had a lot of people in them would look like they had a higher GNI, but we divide it by their population to balance that out. We can also look at birth rate. If a country has a high birth rate, it tends to have a low level of development. Infant mortality, that's the number of babies that die. High infant mortality suggests the country has a poor healthcare system and therefore a low level of development. Adult literacy rate. So if you have a high percentage of people that can read and write, you tend to be a high income country. Life expectancy is the average age you're expected to live in a country. A higher life expectancy suggests that there is a better healthcare system and therefore a country might be a HIC. People per doctor. If there are a lot of people per doctor, so a lot of people for every doctor, that suggests that the healthcare system is poor. Quality of life will therefore be poor, so suggesting a low level of development. Access to the internet. Now that's an interesting one because lots of people in countries that have a very low GNI per capita actually have very high access to the internet. In fact, in sub-Saharan Africa, there is better access to the internet than there is to clean water. So you can measure access to internet, but it's not always a good indicator of the level of development that countries is at. You can measure access to safe water as well. As we've kind of discussed, none of these indicators are perfect. It's very difficult to measure a country's level of development, particularly as people often disagree about what a good quality of life is. So if we're measuring improvements in areas quality of life, which is what development is, unless we agree on what quality of life is, it is very difficult to measure. So we use indicators to suggest the country's level of development, but we never really know for sure, and lots of different people might have different ideas about countries' level of development. Just think about this one. Using the indicators, describe the level of development in LICs. So if we were seeing a low-income country, what kind of things will we expect to see in the indicators? For example, in an LIC, it would have a low GNI per capita. What would the birth rate, the infant mortality rate, and so on be like? Pause the video while you think about that. So in LIC, we're going to have a low GNI per capita, a high birth rate, a high infant mortality rate, low literacy rate, low life expectancy, high number of people per doctor, low access to the internet maybe, and low access to safe water. In HICs, we're going to see the opposite, and in NEEs, we're going to be somewhere in between. So looking at the figure 5, suggest which country is the NEE. Pause the video while you think about that. On this table, China is the NEE, and we know that because it has a higher GNI than Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone's GNI is very low, so that suggests it's a low-income country. China also has a higher life expectancy, but it's not as high as Italy. And it's got a very high adult literacy rate. Again, much higher than Sierra Leone and almost as high as Italy. There is a range of countries within the NEE category. So this is a graph from Gapminder, which you can access loads of data on there that you can have a look at. If you just type in Gapminder on the internet, the graphs are interactive, so you can choose the different indicators and you can move it around. The 3 different colours on this graph show a country's level of development according to Gapminder. So anyone in red is an LIC, anyone in green is an NEE, and anyone in orange is classified as being a HIC. So we can look at the green countries, we're looking at the NEEs. Along the x-axis, we've got countries' income. That's a GNI per capita, they've just called it income. And then along the y-axis, we've got countries' life expectancy. And we can see at the lower end, we've got very low incomes and low life expectancies around about 60. As we move up the income, we start to see an increase in life expectancy, but not for all countries. So this country here has a low life expectancy despite having a relatively high income. But in general, we see as income increases, life expectancy increases. But within the NEE category, there is a range of incomes from, what are we down here? From just above 2,000 per person, dollars per person, all the way up to, what's that, like 31,000 per person. So a really massive range in countries' GNI per capita. And also a range in life expectancy as well. So NE is a really broad category, and we must be really careful not to make generalizations across NEEs. So I've labelled some countries that contrast the ends of the NEE spectrum. We've got Kenya, who's recently become an NEE, India, and China right at the top end, moving into the HIC category. What you are going to do now is complete section 1 of the quiz that is linked in the description. Pause the video, complete section 1 and only section 1, leave the quiz open while you listen to the rest of the video. Right, what we're going to think about now is how have some LICs moved to become NEEs. And Clark and Fisher argue that a country develops because their employment changes. So the types of jobs that people have change. As a country moves from being an LIC to an NEE, the number of people in primary industries falls. That's the number of people working collecting raw materials like farmers. And the number of people working in secondary industries increases. They're people who are manufacturing goods. So as a country moves into the industrial era, we would call that industrializes. So as a country industrializes, it begins to develop rapidly. and we get rapid growth in GNI within when a country industrializes. Thinking about our main question now was whether economic globalisation had created an opportunity for countries to develop. So we want to know, is economic globalisation helping some countries become NEEs? Well, economic globalisation is a process of countries' economies becoming more connected. Today we've got transnational corporations, companies like Apple, that operate across multiple different countries. These companies take advantage of the links between countries, such as cheap transport and instant communication across the internet, to make more profits than other companies. Let's take a look at an example of a transnational corporation, a TNC. So here we've got Apple. Now, Apple is a transnational corporation. We can see from the map that it's operating across multiple different countries, but the types of things that happen for Apple in different countries are different. So Apple has its headquarters in the United States. That's where the iPhone is designed. Then Apple will send those plans to factories in China, who will make the iPhone using raw materials from other countries like Mongolia and countries in South America. The completed iPhones are then shipped and transported to shops where they're sold. Now, although most iPhones are made in China, most iPhones are bought in the United States and in Europe. So we know that TNCs are operating across multiple countries. So how come TNCs operate in some countries and not others? What are countries like China doing to attract TNCs like Apple? Well, countries that attract TNCs have low taxes for businesses. Businesses have to pay a very small or sometimes none at all money to the government. They also have an educated workforce that are skilled and therefore able to make things quickly and make the company more profitable. They have stable governments with little corruption. Corruption is when people do things, use their position of power to... What am I trying to say? Corruption is when people use their position of power in their own interest. So I might say, okay, I'll teach you, but only if you pay me money and then I'll give you the answers to the quizzes. That would be me using my position in my own interest to make money. In another situation, it might be, okay, you can set up your factory here, but only if you pay me more money. Or it might work the other way. Companies might be corrupt themselves and move to countries and say, okay, I'll only set up my company here if you let me put whatever I want into the river. But in general, companies look for places without corrupt governments because they're worried that if the government is corrupt, they'll lose money to it. They also want to be somewhere with good transport infrastructure so that they can move their goods across the world. So we can see China has access to the coast, and that makes it easy for Apple to move the iPhones across the world. In your books, write down the letters A to D. Pause the video while you do that. Okay, what you're going to do is complete the explanation. So the flow diagram is missing boxes. And that's because the explanation is incomplete. Next to A, I need you to say why low taxes for businesses means the country attracts TNCs. Next to B, I need you to say why having an educated workforce means the country attracts TNCs. And the same for C and D. Pause me while you do that. Check your answers against my answers. Okay, so if the business has to pay less money to the government, they're going to be able to keep more money for themselves, so they'll get higher profits. If the workforce is educated, the business will be able to employ the people it needs, it will be more productive, it will be able to make more things more quickly, and it will make more money, it will make more profit as a result of that. With a stable government, any money that the business invests, or any money they put into the business, will be safe, and good transport infrastructure makes it easier to export, so to move goods from one country to another. Pause the video, complete section 2 of the quiz, leave the quiz open when you move back to the video. Right, so some countries are able to attract TNCs, but how do TNCs help countries develop? Well, if a country can attract a TNC, it leads to an increase in employment. If more people are employed, they've got jobs, they'll have higher incomes, which means they're able to meet their basic needs, and they'll also have an increase in disposable income. But actually, it's a more positive story than just that, because we get a multiplier effect. A multiplier effect is where one positive thing leads to another positive thing. So because individuals have higher incomes, they pay more tax to the government, which means that the government can provide public services such as healthcare and education. And because people have higher incomes, they then spend their money. They might go into shops more, they might go on holiday, and that creates employment in the tertiary sector. The tertiary sector is jobs where people are providing services. So if more people are employed in the tertiary sector, that's an increase in employment, that's going to lead to higher incomes, and we'll have more people who are able to meet their basic needs, who will spend more money, and then it creates, you can see, a cycle which we call a positive multiplier effect. Pause the video, complete section 3 of the quiz, and then that is you for today for geography.